Welcome back. This time we're talking about Lost in London, written and directed by Woody Harrelson, who also stars in a semi-autobiographical take on one of the worst nights of his life. If you haven't heard about this project, it's honestly one of the most unique cinematic experiences I've ever experienced. Because Harrelson, in his directorial debut, does something that no one else in the history of cinema has done. He presented his movie live in theaters as it was being filmed. We often complain about how everything's a sequel, reboot, remake, whatever you want to call it. This was something completely different, combining some of the best elements of cinema and live theater. And I've seen several interviews with Harrelson leading up to the film's release, as well as a Q&A that immediately followed it. And he talked about how he had a love for live theater and film and wanted to find a way to combine the two. And what he does here is present a 1 hour, 40-minute long movie filmed in one continuous take. Now that's been done before, but no one has ever actually live streamed it directly to theaters as it was being filmed. Again, as he explained, he liked the concept of the one long continuous take because it gets that live theater feel to the production, but there's still no live audience. By live streaming it, he gets that audience even though he doesn't get to actually see them watching him produce this film. And as I said, it does combine the best aspects of both mediums. From theater, we get that immediacy and, frankly, the danger of a live production, a live performance. While it being a film allows that production to leave the stage and be presented on scene. In fact, they filmed in something like 14 different locations, sometimes traveling from scene to scene by vehicle. All the while, the camera's rolling. Now, obviously, I'm a fan of movies. Otherwise, I wouldn't go to see so many. I wouldn't write about them. I sure wouldn't be getting in front of a camera and talking about them. But I also like live theater as well. I love what each can give its audience. And if I had to choose, I would say this is probably more like a play than a movie. But it being a film, again, allows it to leave the stage and give us something completely new. I was able to watch this live in a theater, and while I was not in the same room with them like if I was watching a stage play, there was still that same level of immediacy and danger that we get from theater and what keeps drawing us back. Of course, you could argue that this is entirely a gimmick, but the film itself is quite entertaining. As I alluded to at the beginning, it's based on a horrible night in Woody Harrelson's life while he was in London that ended with him being arrested and almost ruined his marriage. And although more than a decade has passed since that night, you can tell the scars are still there, and this film serves as sort of a catharsis for him to be able to let go of that night. And the result is a movie that is very funny at times, but there's a lot of heart in it as well. It's obvious from this film that Woody Harrelson does not take himself seriously, but he did take this film seriously. And it can get surprisingly emotional at times as he's dealing with these demons that kind of culminated in this horrible night, while still allowing us to laugh at him while he's going through it. The story begins with Woody wrapping up a performance of this dramatic play, and as he's conversing with one of his co-stars, it becomes obvious that something very bad happened the night before, and he's trying to get to his wife, who's waiting for him at a restaurant, before she sees the latest issues of the tabloids, which are going to paint his very adventurous evening from before all over the front pages. Of course, he's not successful in keeping the news away from his wife, which leads to a blow-up and the potential ruination of his marriage. Giving her time to cool down, he goes with some other friends, and this new night of adventure begins, and basically everything that could possibly go wrong, including encounters with the law and an unruly taxicab driver, ensue. The other big-name actor in this movie, at least the one that you're going to recognize, is Owen Wilson. He plays, well, Owen Wilson, best friends with Woody Harrelson, or at least Woody Harrelson thinks they're best friends. Owen's more leaning toward Wes Anderson. And while the story might not produce as many laughs as some people would have hoped, again, there's a lot of heart behind this movie. We've seen famous people, performers who go through a horrible section of their lives, find some performance-related way to get through it, to deal with those issues. Sometimes they do one-man or one-woman shows, like the late Carrie Fisher. In the case of Harrelson, it was to make this movie. And he gives a lot of weight to this story, even when it is pretty madcap crazy at times. Now, taking into account that this was a live one-shot movie, there are some issues that arise from that. One in particular is the audio, especially in the early scenes. There's one in a stairwell as Woody Harrelson and his co-star in this play are leaving the theater. There's a lot of echo in the audio, and when he first arrives at the restaurant, there's a lot of echo. They kind of clean it up after a while. It's not as noticeable in some of the later indoor scenes. But you can tell that was something they were definitely struggling with one camera going in and out, with stops and vehicles in between. That was like the only real noticeable production problem that I saw. Camera operator John Hembrow, and I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've ever mentioned a camera operator in any review I've ever done in the last 10 years. But he deserves mention because he is as big a star of this movie as Woody Harrelson, even though you never see him. Because he essentially hits record at the beginning of this movie, and an hour and 40 minutes later, he can hit stop. And in between that, he has to hit every single mark. Harrelson has said that he brought cinematographer Nigel Hillaby in. He was the first person he called when he came up with the idea of doing this movie. And they have worked together from its inception. And they had to block out every single scene that was going to happen over 14 shooting locations, which again includes a theater, outside sidewalk scenes, a gigantic dance club with multiple interior scenes, including a restroom, multiple vehicles, a parking lot, a bridge. And they're all filming this at like 3 o'clock in the morning local time. Again, this is a live theater production without the theater, without the protection of those walls and all of the warnings from the ushers to tell everyone to be quiet. This is a film that had around 30-something actors, scores of extras, and several hundred crew members. And they all came together to make a movie, a cinematic experience that we've never had before. And even better, the movie itself is quite good. I'm assuming at some point in time that it will be available for home video release. It's definitely still worth watching, although I think it will lose a little bit of its luster without the added benefit of this being a live production. It's sort of that slight step down that you get with a filmed theater production. It's still a live performance. The story is still there. The actors are still there. It's just not the same thing that you would get with the live thing. I honestly don't know if anyone's ever going to try this again, but I hope they do, because this was a very interesting experience, and I enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed the writing. I enjoyed the direction. I think if Harrelson wants to try something a little bit more traditional and just actually direct a standard movie, I think he's got the chops to do it. If he wants to try to do something as crazy as this again, I'll go see that too. Now, if you were lucky enough to see Lost in London, what did you think about it? As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some other reviews, and until next time, I'll see you at the movies.